The penthouse was tomb silent, 40 floors above the city, curtains sealed against the daylight, the air thick with something Preston Cole couldn't name. Sweat. Medication. Surrender. Veronica Hale lay motionless on Egyptian cotton sheets, her $1,200 silk blouse clinging to her ribs, breathing like each inhale cost her something. She didn't look up when the door clicked, just waited. Listened to the work boots crossing marble she'd chosen in Milan. Then, voice barely a thread. "Please, just make it fast." Preston's toolbox hit the floor. He stared at the woman whose face once graced Forbes covers, now gray-skinned and hollow-eyed, mistaking him for someone else entirely. Someone final. But he wasn't the man she'd paid for. And what happened in the next 11 seconds would crack open everything she'd believed about power. Loyalty, and which lives the world decides are worth saving, because some mercy is darker than death itself. Preston didn't move. The toolbox lay where it fell, screwdrivers scattered across imported tile. Veronica's eyes were still closed, her chest rising and falling in that terrible rhythm of someone counting breaths, like currency. He'd seen it before, 3 years ago. Different room, different woman, same desperate mathematics of time running out. His wife hadn't asked anyone to make it fast. She'd fought until the morphine made fighting impossible, until her hand went slack in his, and Rosie stopped asking when Mommy was coming home. "Ma'am," Preston said quietly. His voice sounded wrong in the cathedral silence of wealth. "I'm here about the air conditioning." Veronica's eyes snapped open. For a moment, confusion flickered across features that had once commanded boardrooms, negotiated billion-dollar mergers, fired executives without flinching. Then something worse than confusion. Embarrassment. She turned her face away, fingers clutching the sheets. "Get out!" Her voice was stronger now, sharp enough to cut. "I didn't call for air conditioning. Get out!" But Preston had already seen what she was trying to hide. The oxygen monitor clipped to her finger. The prescription bottles lined up on the nightstand like soldiers. The medical alert bracelet half hidden under silk. And most damning of all, the phone on the floor beside the bed, still glowing with the dark web forum she'd been browsing before he arrived. He should have left, should have backed out, apologized for the confusion. Let the woman have whatever dignity remained in her private hell. That's what anyone else would have done, what anyone smart would have done. But Preston had spent 3 years learning that the worst thing you could do to someone drowning was pretend you didn't see the water. So instead, he bent down, picked up his screwdrivers one by one, and said, "The building manager called, said your unit's been running hot for 2 days straight. Compressor's probably shot." He straightened, met her eyes. "I'll check the unit on the roof. Won't bother you again." Veronica watched him gather his tools with the kind of suspicion that came from a lifetime of people wanting something. Everyone always wanted something. Access. Favors. A piece of the empire she'd built from her father's construction business and her own brutal competence. But this man, with calloused hands and paint-stained work pants, just nodded once and headed for the door. She wanted to let him go. Should have let him go. But the words came out anyway, sharp and testing. "How much does a repairman make? Hourly?" Preston paused at the threshold. "Enough." "Enough for what?" "To feed my kid. Fix her teeth when they come in crooked. Maybe save up for college if she wants it." He glanced back, and something in his face made Veronica's chest tighten in a way that had nothing to do with the tumor pressing against her lungs. "Enough to sleep at night, knowing I did something that matters." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Veronica lay in the expensive darkness, listening to his footsteps fade toward the roof access. Her phone buzzed. The forum. Someone confirming they'd received her deposit. Promising discretion, asking for an address. She'd been so certain this morning. So ready. 45 years old, no husband, no children, No one who'd miss her beyond the quarterly earnings reports. The cancer was stage 4. Inoperable. 6 months, maybe 8 if she wanted to spend them vomiting from chemotherapy, while the board circled like vultures, waiting for weakness they could exploit. Better to go out on her terms, clean. Fast. Before anyone saw her reduced to this. But now she couldn't stop thinking about the repairman's hands, the way they'd moved when he picked up his tools, careful and methodical, the hands of someone who fixed things because fixing things mattered. Her own hands had built Hale Industries into a $3 billion corporation, 3,200 employees, contracts spanning 6 continents. And not one of them knew she was dying. Not one of them would have picked up her screwdrivers if she'd dropped them. Veronica deleted the forum message, not because she'd changed her mind, just because she needed the air conditioning fixed first. Even dying required some basic comfort. That's what she told herself. Preston stood on the roof, hands braced against the AC unit that was running perfectly fine. The city sprawled below. Tiny cars and tinier people living their tiny lives, unaware that 40 floors above them, a woman was trying to choose death. He'd known the moment he saw her, the way terminal patients looked at you like you were already part of the past, something they were practicing letting go of. The building manager hadn't called. Preston had been doing a job 3 floors down when he'd heard the super mention the penthouse, mention Veronica Hale, mention how strange it was that she hadn't complained about anything in weeks when she usually called twice a day about some detail or another. He'd volunteered to check on it, told himself it was professional courtesy. But standing here now, wrench in hand, he knew he'd lied. He'd come up here because Rosie had asked him that morning why some people got to live in the clouds while other people fixed the clouds, and he hadn't had a good answer. He'd come up here because the last thing his wife had said to him, barely a whisper through the pain medication, was, "Don't let Rosie think the world is just people who take and people who give. Teach her there's a third kind, the ones who stay." He hadn't understood it then. Wasn't sure he understood it now, but he understood that whatever was happening in that penthouse, someone needed to stay. The unit kicked on with a mechanical hum. Preston pulled out his phone, looked at the photo that served as his wallpaper. Rosie, 7 years old, missing both front teeth, grinning at the camera while holding up a drawing she'd made of their apartment. She'd colored it bigger than it was, added a backyard they didn't have, drawn a stick figure labeled Daddy's Friend standing next to them, because she'd been asking lately why they never had anyone over for dinner, why it was always just the 2 of them. He'd told her they had each other, and that was enough. But the truth was he was terrified. Terrified that if he let anyone close, if he built something that looked like family again, death would come back to take that too. His phone buzzed. Text from the super. "Any luck with the Hale unit?" Preston typed back. "Compressor's failing. Need to order parts. Might take a few visits." He hit send before he could question why he was lying, why he was creating a reason to come back to a woman who clearly wanted to be left alone. Then he picked up his toolbox and headed back down the roof access, already knowing he'd regret this, already knowing he'd do it anyway. Veronica didn't answer when Preston knocked 3 days later. He stood in the hallway, toolbox at his feet, holding a bag that Rosie had insisted he bring. "Daddy, if someone's sick, you bring soup. That's what Mrs. Chen did when I had the flu." He tried to explain that this was different, that the woman in the penthouse wasn't someone they knew, wasn't someone who wanted help. But Rosie had already been ladling chicken broth into a container, her small hand steady and certain, and Preston hadn't had the heart to stop her. The door finally opened. Veronica looked worse, thinner. The silk blouse replaced by a cotton t-shirt that hung off her frame like she was a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. She stared at Preston, then at the bag in his hand, then back at his face. "I told you I didn't need your compressor," Preston interrupted, still waiting on the part. but I brought some temporary cooling packs. Help with the heat until I can do a proper fix." He held up the bag. "Also, my daughter made soup. She's 7. Doesn't really understand the concept of boundaries yet." Something shifted in Veronica's expression. Not softening exactly. More like a door opening a crack. Just enough to see what might be on the other side. "You told your daughter about me?" "Told her I met someone who was sick. She said sick people need soup." Preston shrugged. Tried to explain it was more complicated than that. But 7-year-olds have a way of making things simple. Veronica should have closed the door, should have called building security, filed a complaint, made it clear that she didn't need pity from a repairman and his child. But instead, she heard herself say, "What kind of soup?" "Chicken, with the little star noodles. She says they're good luck." Preston's mouth quirked. "I told her that's not really how luck works. She told me I don't know everything." Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. He held out the bag. "You don't have to eat it. Can throw it away the second I leave." "But she asked me to make sure you got it, so now you have." Veronica took the bag. It was warm in her hands, heavier than she expected. When was the last time someone had made her food? Not prepared by a chef, not ordered from a restaurant, but made, with hands and care and the specific intention that she should eat it. She couldn't remember. "Thank you," she said, and meant it. Preston nodded, started to turn away, then stopped. "The compressor part's going to take about 2 weeks. I'll need to check the unit every few days. Make sure it doesn't fail completely." He met her eyes. "If that's all right with you." Veronica knew what he was really asking, whether she'd still be here in 2 weeks, whether she planned to see this through to whatever end she'd been planning when he first walked in. She should have told him to mind his own business, should have made it clear that her life, her death, her choices were none of his concern. Instead, she found herself saying, "Tuesday and Friday mornings, before 10. I have calls after that." It was a lie. She didn't have calls anymore, hadn't logged into her work email in 3 weeks. But saying it made her feel almost normal, like she was still the kind of person who had a schedule, who had obligations beyond deciding which day would be her last. Preston's face didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he knew she was lying. Knew and didn't care. "Tuesday and Friday before 10, he repeated. Got it. The pattern established itself without either of them acknowledging it. Preston would arrive at 9:30, toolbox in hand, and spend 20 minutes on the roof doing things to an air conditioning unit that worked perfectly fine. Then he'd knock on Veronica's door, deliver whatever Rosie had made, or insisted he bring. Soup, cookies burned at the edges, a drawing of a sunflower, because sick people should see something growing, and leave. They rarely talked beyond brief exchanges. Veronica never invited him in further than the foyer. Preston never pushed. But on the 4th visit, Veronica asked, "What happened to her mother?" Preston set down the container of soup. Chicken again. Rosie's only recipe. "Car accident. 3 years ago. She was coming home from a night shift at the hospital. Fell asleep at the wheel." His voice was matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who'd said these words enough times that they'd lost their ability to wound. Almost. "I'm sorry." "Me too." He picked up his toolbox. "She was a good person. Better than me. Used to volunteer at free clinics, bring home patients' stories, cry over people she'd never see again. I used to think it was too much, that she cared too hard." He paused at the door. Turns out caring too hard is the only thing that actually matters. Veronica stood in her empty penthouse after he left, holding Rosie's soup like it was something precious. She hadn't told anyone about the cancer, hadn't called her few remaining friends, hadn't informed her attorney to update her will, hadn't reached out to the handful of cousins she only saw at funerals. What was the point? They'd react with the appropriate sadness, say the appropriate words, and then get back to their lives while she got back to dying. But this man, this stranger who fixed things for a living, kept showing up, kept bringing soup his daughter made, kept acting like her being alive on Tuesday meant something worth returning for on Friday. She opened her laptop for the first time in weeks. The emails were catastrophic. 400 unread messages, increasing in urgency. The latest from Garrett Stone, her CFO. Subject line: emergency board meeting regarding your absence. She'd known this was coming. The board had been circling for years, waiting for any sign of weakness, Stone especially. He'd been angling for CEO since she'd promoted him 5 years ago, never quite forgiving her for being better at the job than he'd ever be. Now, he had his excuse. She clicked open the email. Veronica, I hope this message finds you well, though your continued absence suggests otherwise. The board has requested a meeting to discuss the leadership transition plan, given your extended leave without adequate explanation. I'm sure you understand that in your absence, someone needs to steer the ship. I've taken the liberty of assuming interim authority over key decisions. We should discuss making this arrangement permanent. For the good of the company, of course. Veronica read it 3 times. Felt the old anger rising, the instinct to fight, to show up at the office and remind Stone and the rest of them exactly who built this company from nothing. But the anger was weaker now, diluted by exhaustion and the bitter knowledge that Stone was right about one thing. Someone did need to steer the ship, and she was too busy drowning to hold the wheel. She closed the laptop, ate Rosie's soup. The Little Star noodles were soggy and the broth was oversalted. It was the best thing she'd tasted in months. Preston noticed the change on the 6th visit. Veronica was dressed, not in silk blouses or corporate armor, but in real clothes, jeans, a sweater, shoes instead of bare feet. She opened the door wider this time, gestured him inside with something almost like welcome. Coffee? She asked. It was the first time she'd offered him anything. Preston set down his toolbox. Sure, thanks. She led him to the kitchen, all marble and chrome, the kind of space that had never seen actual cooking. But she moved through it with surprising competence, pulling out a French press, measuring grounds with the precision of someone who'd learned to do things properly, or not at all. Your daughter, Veronica said. Back turned as she waited for the water to boil. Does she ask about her mother? Every day at first, then every week. Now it's random. She'll be fine for months, then see something. A woman wearing her mom's perfume. A show we used to watch together. And it hits her all over again. Preston leaned against the counter. I used to try to have answers ready. Explanations about heaven or energy, or how love doesn't die just because people do. But she doesn't want explanations. She just wants someone to sit with her while it hurts. Veronica pressed the French press down slowly. I'm dying, she said. Not a confession. A fact. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. 6 months ago they said I had 8 months, so I guess I'm running ahead of schedule. She poured 2 cups, handed one to Preston. I'm telling you because you keep bringing soup. Seems dishonest to let you waste food on someone who won't be around to eat it much longer. Preston took the coffee, sipped it. It was good, strong enough to taste like something. Rosie makes the soup for her, not for you. Veronica frowned. I don't understand. Every night she asks me who needs help tomorrow. I tell her about the jobs I've got lined up, the people I'll meet. She picks one, makes something for them, says it's practice. Preston met her eyes. Practice for when she's big enough to help people herself. You're not wasting anything. You're teaching my kid that making soup for strangers matters. Something in Veronica's chest cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way ice cracks in spring, making space for something underneath to push through. She sat down at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around the coffee cup like it was keeping her anchored. I built a company worth $3 billion, she said quietly. 3,200 employees, 6 continents. My picture's in business textbooks. Forbes calls me a titan. She looked up at Preston. And I was going to die alone in that bedroom, with nothing but a phone number from a dark web forum, and enough pills to make it fast. But you didn't. No. She smiled, thin and bitter. I didn't. Because some repairman's daughter thinks star-shaped noodles are good luck, and her father's too stubborn to mind his own business. Preston smiled back. Guilty. They sat in silence, drinking coffee in a kitchen designed for show rather than use, while 40 floors below, the city went about its morning. Unaware that something small and significant was happening in the clouds. Finally, Veronica said, "The board's moving against me. My CFO's trying to push me out, take over the company. If they succeed, everything I built." She stopped, started again. I was going to let them, figured it didn't matter. What's a legacy worth when you're dead? More than you think, Preston said. My wife used to say the only thing that survives us is what we taught other people to care about. Buildings fall down, companies get sold, money gets spent. But if you taught someone to give a damn, that outlasts everything. He finished his coffee. Your board's making a move because they think you're too weak to fight back. Seems like a bad assumption. Veronica laughed. It came out rusty, like machinery that hadn't been used in years. I'm dying, Preston. I can barely walk to the bathroom without getting winded. What exactly am I supposed to fight them with? Time, Preston said simply. You've got time. Maybe not years, but enough. Enough to decide who you want to be on the way out. The person who gave up, or the person who made them work for it. He stood, picked up his toolbox. Your call. But for what it's worth, Rosie's been drawing you into her pictures. Last night showed you in a cape. Said you looked like someone who fights bad guys. He headed for the door, then paused. Kids are pretty good at seeing who people actually are. Better than adults, usually. After he left, Veronica sat in her expensive kitchen and thought about a 7-year-old girl who drew capes on dying women. Thought about soup and star-shaped noodles and the specific kind of stubbornness it took to keep showing up when someone clearly wanted to be left alone. Then she opened her laptop and started typing an email to her attorney. If Stone wanted a fight, he was about to get one. She might be dying, but she wasn't dead yet. The next visit, Preston found the door already open. Veronica was on the phone, pacing the penthouse in yoga pants and a Hale Industries t-shirt he suspected she'd had since the company's early days. Her voice was sharp, cutting through someone's excuses with surgical precision. I don't care what Garrett told you. I'm still CEO. Any decision over $50,000 requires my signature. If he's bypassing that, he's violating corporate bylaws. Get me the documentation. She hung up. Noticed Preston standing in the doorway. Sorry, should have warned you. I'm making life difficult for people today. Preston set down the toolbox and the container Rosie had sent. Banana bread this time with chocolate chips. Sounds like they deserve it. They really do. Veronica took the container, opened it, broke off a piece of banana bread. It was dry, and the chocolate chips were unevenly distributed, clearly the work of a 7-year-old baker. She ate it anyway. I have a question, and you can say no. Preston waited. I need help, Veronica said. Not with air conditioning, with my CFO. He's been embezzling. Small amounts at first, easy to hide in the quarterly reports. But I started digging yesterday, and the numbers don't match. He's been selling company assets, moving money offshore, building a case that I'm mentally incompetent so he can take over completely. She met Preston's eyes. I need proof, real proof, the kind that holds up in court. And I need someone he doesn't know exists to help me get it. Preston should have said no. Should have explained that he fixed air conditioners, not corporate conspiracies. That he had a kid to think about, and bills to pay, and no business getting involved in whatever war was happening in boardrooms and offshore accounts. Instead, he asked, What kind of help? Stone has a private investigator on retainer. Follows me when I leave the building. Probably has been for weeks. I need someone to follow him. See who he's meeting with, what he's planning. I'll pay— No. Preston's voice was flat. Not money. Veronica frowned. Then what? Rosie needs dental work. Braces. Maybe surgery depending on how her jaw develops. Insurance covers some of it, but not enough. I've been saving, but it's slow. He crossed his arms. You help me get her teeth fixed. I'll help you get your proof. It was transactional. Clean. The kind of deal Veronica understood. She nodded. Done. I'll call my dentist today. Best orthodontist in the city. Whatever she needs. Not your dentist. The clinic on 5th and Morrison, where people like us go. Preston's expression was unreadable. Rosie needs to learn that people help each other. Not that rich people buy solutions and poor people are grateful. We do this as equals, or we don't do it at all. Veronica stared at him. In 30 years of negotiating, no one had ever turned down her money and offered her a partnership instead. It should have offended her. Should have felt like pride masquerading as principle. But looking at Preston's face, she understood. This wasn't about pride. This was about teaching a 7-year-old girl that the world could be fair, even when it rarely was. Equals, she agreed. I'll send you everything I have on Stone. Bank records, travel logs, emails. You figure out the pattern, find the proof. I'll handle the legal side once we have it. They shook on it. Preston's hand was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Veronica's was cold, the skin paper-thin, bones too prominent. But the grip was firm on both sides. The deal was made. What neither of them said out loud was that this was also an agreement to stay alive. That you didn't start a war if you planned to die before seeing it through. Preston left to pick up Rosie from school. Veronica spent the rest of the afternoon on the phone with her attorney, her accountant, and a private security firm that specialized in corporate investigations. If Stone wanted to play dirty, she'd remind him who taught him everything he knew. 2 weeks later, Preston sat in a rental car across from an expensive steakhouse, watching Garrett Stone have dinner with a man he'd identified as Harold Chen, CEO of Meridian Corp., Hale Industries' biggest competitor. His phone buzzed. Text from Veronica. Any luck? Preston took 3 photos as Stone passed Chen a manila folder across the table. Typed back, your CFO just handed your competitor something in a folder marked confidential. That normal? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Then, get me a clear shot of that folder if you can. Preston had been doing this for 9 days now. Following Stone through the city, documenting meetings, photographing documents left visible through car windows, building a timeline of someone dismantling a company from the inside. It should have been boring. Instead, it reminded him of the year after his wife died, when he'd focused on the smallest tasks. Changing Rosie's diapers, washing bottles, folding tiny clothes, because they were concrete and solvable in a way that grief wasn't. This was the same. Watching Stone was something he could do, something with clear objectives and measurable progress. Something that meant Veronica stayed alive long enough to finish it. He'd noticed her getting thinner, moving slower. The yoga pants replaced by loose sweatpants. The morning coffee sessions getting shorter as she tired more quickly. But her mind was sharp as ever, turning the scraps of information Preston brought back into a prosecution-worthy case. She'd brought in forensic accountants, hired a law firm that specialized in corporate malfeasance, built a coalition of board members who'd been suspicious of Stone's rapid promotion. The case was solid. They just needed one more piece. Proof that Stone wasn't just embezzling. Proof that he was actively sabotaging the company, selling secrets, ensuring Hale Industries would collapse so he could rebuild it under his control. Chen stood up from the table, shook Stone's hand, left the folder behind. Rookie mistake. Or arrogance. Preston waited until Stone went to the bathroom, then approached the table. "Excuse me, sir," he said to the waiter hovering nearby. "The gentleman at this table asked me to grab his folder, said he forgot something." The waiter barely glanced at him. "Sure, go ahead." Preston picked up the folder, walked out of the restaurant, and didn't breathe properly until he was 3 blocks away. Inside were contracts, sale agreements for Hale Industries assets, patents, client lists, everything Meridian would need to gut Hale Industries and absorb what remained. All signed by Garrett Stone, backdated to make it look like Veronica had approved them before she got sick. Preston called Veronica. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me you got it." "Got it. Everything. Contracts, signatures, the works. He's been selling you out piece by piece." Silence on the other end. Then, "Can you bring it to me tonight?" "I need to see it. Be there in 20 minutes." Veronica met him at the door. She was wearing a suit. Real clothes, tailored and professional, her hair pulled back, makeup covering the worst of the gray pallor. She looked like the woman from the Forbes covers. Almost. "You're going to the office," Preston said. It wasn't a question. "Emergency board meeting. Tomorrow morning. I've called in every favor, threatened every fence-sitter, promised everything short of my firstborn." She took the folder from him, flipped through it quickly. Her hands were steady. "This is enough, more than enough. Stone's finished. You should rest tonight. Let the lawyers handle the presentation." "No." Veronica looked up, and there was something fierce in her eyes. Something Preston recognized from the mirror on the mornings he got up to feed Rosie, even though every cell in his body wanted to stay in bed and pretend the world could function without him. "I built this company. If it's going down, I'm going down with it. And if it's being saved, I'm damn well going to be there to see Stone's face when he realizes he lost." Preston wanted to argue, wanted to point out that she could barely stand for 10 minutes without getting winded, that pushing herself like this could kill her faster than the cancer would. But he understood. This wasn't about the company. This was about choosing how your story ended. "Okay," he said instead. "But you're not going alone." I know you don't need it. I'm offering anyway." He met her eyes. "Rosie asked if you were winning your fight with the bad guys. I told her I didn't know yet. I'd like to be able to tell her, yes." Veronica's expression softened. "Your daughter shouldn't be invested in my corporate drama. Too late. She's been drawing you with increasingly elaborate capes. Last one had lightning bolts." Preston smiled slightly. "You're her hero. Heroes don't lose." Something in Veronica broke then. Not the crack from before. A full break. The kind that lets light flood in through the gaps. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, you can come." That night, Veronica couldn't sleep. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse, looking out at the city she'd conquered through sheer force of will and strategic brilliance. Tomorrow, she'd walk into that boardroom and fight for everything she'd built. She'd probably win. The evidence was overwhelming. Stone would be removed, possibly arrested. The company would survive. But she wouldn't. Not really. The cancer was winning its own war, slower than Stone's attempted coup, but more certain. She had months left, maybe less. And for the first time since her diagnosis, that felt like enough. She thought about Preston's wife, the woman who'd cared too hard. Thought about Rosie, who made soup for strangers and drew capes on dying CEOs. Thought about Preston himself, who'd chosen to stay when every rational impulse must have told him to walk away. They'd taught her something these past weeks. Not about fighting or winning or building empires that lasted. They'd taught her about the specific courage it took to show up, to care when caring was inconvenient, to make soup when nothing else could be done. She pulled out her laptop and started typing an email to her attorney. New instructions for her will. New plans for what happened to Hale Industries after she died. The boardroom fell silent when Veronica walked in. She moved slowly, Preston a half-step behind, carrying her briefcase like he belonged there, and the assembled board members stared, with varying degrees of shock and discomfort. Garrett Stone sat at the head of the table, her chair, and had the audacity to smile. "Veronica, what a surprise. We'd heard you were too ill to attend." "You heard wrong." She took the chair to his right, gestured for Preston to set the briefcase down. "Shall we begin?" Stone's smile tightened. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately. I'm not sure who your companion is, but board meetings are confidential." "This is Preston Cole. He's been consulting for me on a security matter." Veronica opened the briefcase, pulled out the folder. "Specifically, investigating why our quarterly numbers don't match our actual assets. Why clients have been mysteriously moving to Meridian Corp. Why you've been spending company funds on private investigators and offshore accounts." The room went very still. Stone's face didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "I have no idea what you're talking about. If there are discrepancies, we can review them with the accounting team." "We already did." Veronica slid the folder across the table. "Sale contracts, signed by you. Backdated to make it look like I authorized them before my illness. Very clever. Except you got sloppy in October. Signed a contract dated the 14th, but I was in the hospital that day. On record." With witnesses, Stone opened the folder, flipped through it. His face went pale. "Where did you get this? Does it matter?" Veronica leaned back in her chair, every inch the CEO who'd terrified competitors for 2 decades. "You've been dismantling my company piece by piece, selling it to Meridian for pennies on the dollar, and pocketing the difference. That's embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. I've already filed complaints with the SEC and the district attorney. Your assets are frozen as of this morning." "You can't prove. I can prove all of it." She gestured to Preston. "Mr. Cole spent 2 weeks documenting your meetings, your transactions, your communications with Harold Chen. We have photographs, bank records, testimony from 3 whistleblowers you thought you'd silenced with NDAs. You're done, Garrett. The only question now is whether you resign quietly, or I make this public and destroy what's left of your reputation." Stone looked around the table, looked at the board members who wouldn't meet his eyes, at the attorneys who were already whispering among themselves, at Preston, standing quietly behind Veronica like a particularly solid shadow. Then he stood up. "This isn't over." "Yes," Veronica said calmly. "It is." He left without another word. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like an ending. The board erupted into questions, demands for explanation, legal discussions about next steps, and damage control. Veronica answered them all with the precision of someone who'd spent their entire life being better prepared than everyone else in the room. But halfway through, her vision started to blur. Her hand started to shake. She felt Preston's hand on her shoulder, steadying. "Excuse me," she said to the board. "I need a moment." Preston helped her to the executive bathroom, held her steady while she vomited into the marble sink, said nothing when she finally straightened, and looked at herself in the mirror. She was gray, skeletal. The suit that had fit perfectly 6 months ago hung off her like a costume. "I'm dying," she said to her reflection. "I know," Preston replied, "but you're still here, and Stone isn't." Veronica laughed, thin and breathless. "Is that what winning looks like?" "Sometimes. Yeah." She turned to face him. This man who fixed air conditioners and raised his daughter alone, and had somehow decided that a dying CEO was worth saving. "Thank you," she said. "For all of it. The soup, the investigation. For staying. Preston shook his head. You stayed. I just watched. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, board restructuring, and carefully managed press releases. Stone was arrested. Meridian Corp faced its own investigation. Hale Industries survived, battered, but intact. Veronica stepped down as CEO, appointed a successor she trusted, and set up a foundation with the majority of her personal wealth. The Hale Foundation, focused on supporting single-parent households, particularly those dealing with medical crises. Preston tried to refuse when she offered him the director position. I fix air conditioners, he said. You're asking me to run a multi-million-dollar foundation. I'm not qualified. You're more qualified than anyone. Veronica was in bed now, permanently. The fight with Stone had taken everything she had left, but her mind was clear and her voice was firm. You know what it's like to raise a child alone, to choose between medication and groceries, to be invisible to everyone who should care. That's the qualification that matters. I don't know how to run an organization. Then learn. Hire people who do know. But make sure every decision, every dollar, every policy, she took a breath, fighting through the pain, gets filtered through the question. What would help Preston Cole? What would help Rosie? He took the job, not because he wanted it, because Rosie, when she'd heard about it, had said, Daddy, we could help people like Mrs. Chen who couldn't afford heat last winter, like the Hendersons who had to choose between rent and medicine, like us, before you got good at fixing things. And Preston had realized his daughter was right. This was just fixing things on a larger scale. He could learn to do that. 3 months after the board meeting, Preston brought Rosie to visit Veronica. The little girl carried a container of soup, chicken with star-shaped noodles, and a new drawing. This one showed 3 stick figures, Daddy, Rosie, and a woman in a cape with a crown. That's you, Rosie explained, handing the drawing to Veronica. Daddy says you're not feeling good, but I drew you with a crown because queens don't stop being queens just because they're tired. Veronica's eyes filled with tears. She took the drawing with shaking hands, studied it like it was a Rembrandt. Thank you, Rosie. I'll keep this forever. Forever's a long time, Rosie said seriously. But I think you can do it. Preston put a hand on his daughter's shoulder. Rosie, why don't you go look at the view for a minute? I need to talk to Ms. Hale. Rosie nodded, skipped to the window, pressed her nose against the glass to look at the city 40 floors below. She doesn't know, Veronica said quietly, that you're dying. Preston shook his head. She knows people don't last forever. Her mom taught her that. But I haven't told her about you specifically. Didn't know if you'd want. I want her to know, Veronica interrupted. When I'm gone, I want her to know that she saved my life. Not from dying alone, from dying like I didn't matter. Her voice cracked. Tell her that. Someday. Preston nodded. I will. They sat in silence while Rosie narrated the city view to herself, pointing out buildings and cars and tiny people living their tiny lives. Then Veronica said, I'm changing my will. Again. The penthouse. I want Rosie to have it when she's older. Not to live in, but to sell, or rent out, or... Veronica, we can't accept. You can. You will. She met his eyes. That child has more wisdom in her 7 years than I found in 45. She deserves to know that wisdom has value. Real value. The kind that can pay for college, or a house, or whatever else she dreams up in that brilliant little head. Preston wanted to argue, but looking at Veronica's face, he understood this wasn't charity. This was legacy. The same way his wife had left him with Rosie's laugh and her capacity for hope. The same way he was leaving Rosie with the knowledge that showing up mattered. Veronica was leaving her with proof that even dying women could change the world if they just held on long enough to do it right. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." Veronica smiled. It was the first real smile Preston had seen from her, the kind that reached her eyes and made her look almost young again. "No, thank you. Both of you. For teaching a mean old CEO that soup and star-shaped noodles are what matters." "You're not mean," Rosie called from the window. "You're just scared. Daddy says scared people act mean sometimes. But you're not scary. You're nice." Out of the mouths of babes, Veronica laughed, then coughed, then laughed again through the pain. Preston helped her sip water, adjusted her pillows, did all the small, careful things he'd learned doing this for his wife. Things he'd hoped he'd never have to do again. Things he was somehow grateful to do one more time. Rosie came back to the bed, climbed up carefully, and snuggled against Veronica's side like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Can I stay for a little bit?" she asked. "I want to tell you about the book I'm reading. It's about a girl who saves a kingdom." "I'd like that," Veronica whispered. And for the next hour, while afternoon light turned golden against the windows and the city hummed far below, a 7-year-old girl told a dying CEO about fictional kingdoms and real bravery. Preston sat in the corner, watching his daughter teach one more person how to stay. Veronica Hale died on a Thursday morning in late spring. Preston got the call from her hospice nurse just after dropping Rosie at school. He stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to his ear, and felt the familiar weight of loss settle over his shoulders. Different from when his wife died. Softer somehow, because this time he'd been able to say goodbye. This time, death came as an ending rather than an interruption. The funeral was small. Veronica had specified that in her final wishes. No corporate memorial. No speeches from board members who'd barely known her. Just Preston, Rosie, a handful of employees who'd worked with her since the beginning, and her attorney reading a letter she'd written. "To anyone listening," the letter began, "I spent 45 years building something I thought would outlast me. A company. A legacy. A name that meant power. I was wrong about what matters. What matters is who you make soup for, who you show up for, who you teach to care." The letter went on, but Preston stopped listening. Rosie's hand was in his, small and warm, and she was crying quietly. Not for Veronica, exactly. For the idea of loss. For the reminder that people left even when you weren't ready. "Daddy," she whispered, "is Aunt Veronica with Mommy now?" "I don't know, baby. Maybe. I hope so. I think they'd be friends." Preston squeezed her hand. "Me too." After the service, the attorney pulled Preston aside, handed him an envelope marked, "For Preston and Rosie." Inside was a letter, written in Veronica's careful script. "Preston, thank you for teaching me that showing up is its own kind of heroism, for proving that wealth means nothing if you die surrounded by strangers, for bringing your daughter into my life and letting her draw me wearing capes I never earned. The foundation is yours now. Run it well. Run it like you raised Rosie, with the understanding that people need more than money. They need someone to notice them, to bring them soup, to stay. Rosie, when you're old enough to read this, I'll be long gone. But I wanted you to know that you saved my life, not with medicine or miracles, with star-shaped noodles and drawings and the kind of fearless love that adults forget how to feel. Never lose that. The world needs people who care too hard. Your mother was one. Your father is one. You will be one. That's the legacy that matters. The penthouse is yours someday. Do something good with it. Something your father would be proud of. I already know he will be." Preston folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope. Rosie was waiting by the car, holding the drawing she'd made of Veronica with the crown. "Can we go to the penthouse?" she asked. "I want to see her view one more time." Sure, baby, we can do that. They drove through the city in comfortable silence, the kind that came from years of being each other's primary person. At the building, the doorman recognized them now, waved them through with a sad smile. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt longer than usual. Or maybe Preston was just dreading walking into that empty space, seeing all the places where Veronica had been and would never be again. But when they opened the door, the penthouse wasn't empty. The hospice nurse had left flowers. The housekeeper had cleaned everything until it sparkled. And on the kitchen island, someone had left a container. Preston opened it. Inside was soup, chicken with star-shaped noodles. A note attached. From the staff at Hale Industries. Thank you for teaching us what matters. We'll keep making soup. Rosie picked up the note, read it slowly. Daddy, other people know about the soup now. Yeah, they do. That's good. More people should make soup. She looked up at him with her mother's eyes and Veronica's wisdom. Can we start making extra for other people who need it? Preston pulled his daughter close, held her, while they stood in the expensive kitchen of a woman who died learning the value of star-shaped noodles. Yeah, baby, we can do that. And they did. The foundation grew. The soup program became its signature initiative. And every time Preston hired someone new, every time he reviewed a grant proposal, every time he made a decision about who to help and how, he thought about a dying CEO who'd mistaken him for an angel of death and somehow found life instead. Years later, when Rosie was older and asked him about Veronica, Preston told her the truth, that sometimes the people who save you are the ones who need saving most, that showing up matters more than being qualified, that the world measures success in dollars and power, but real wealth is measured in who you make soup for and who makes soup for you. Rosie listened, then asked, Did you love her? Preston thought about it, about Tuesday and Friday mornings, about coffee in unused kitchens and investigations in rental cars, about watching someone choose to live when dying would have been easier. Not the way I loved your mom, he said finally. But yeah, I loved her. The way you love people who teach you how to be better. Good, Rosie said. Everyone should be loved like that. She was 14 now, already taller than her mother had been, already dreaming of medical school and ways to help people who fell through the cracks, already understanding what it meant to care too hard. Preston watched her walk away. This child who'd saved a CEO with star-shaped noodles, who'd inherited a penthouse and turned it into affordable housing for single parents, who'd learned from her father and a dying stranger that the only thing that survives us is what we teach other people to care about. Somewhere, he thought Veronica was smiling, and his wife too, watching their daughter become the kind of person who made the world smaller and kinder with every soup she made. That was legacy. That was what mattered. Not the buildings or the billions. Just this. The quiet revolution of caring when caring was inconvenient, of showing up when leaving would be easier, of choosing again and again to stay. Preston went back to work. The foundation had applications to review, families to help, soup to make. There was always more work to do. And that, he'd learned, was the point. You kept showing up. You kept making soup. You kept teaching your daughter that some things, the important things, were worth the trouble of caring too hard. He pulled out his phone, looked at the photo on his wallpaper. Rosie and Veronica, taken a week before she died, both of them grinning at the camera. Behind them, the city stretched out 40 floors below, full of people who needed soup and didn't know it yet. Preston smiled, went back to work, kept staying, because in the end, that's what love looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect words, just showing up, making soup, staying even when staying was hard, teaching the next generation that caring too hard was the only thing that actually mattered. Veronica had learned it. Rosie lived it. And Preston, standing in his office with case files stacked high and coffee getting cold, understood that he'd learned it too. From a wife who died too soon. From a CEO who died just in time. From a daughter who knew that star-shaped noodles could save the world. He picked up the next file, read about a father who couldn't afford his son's medication, made a note to approve the grant, added a second note, send soup. Then he got back to work. There was always someone who needed help. Always someone worth showing up for. Always another reason to stay. And that, Preston thought, was exactly how it should be.